Hello. My name is Josh, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about Figma. Before I teach you about Figma, though, I'm going to give you a quick explainer in design, just because I think that you should really know a bit about design before you start making random shit in Figma. So I'm going to give you the basics. First of all, there's three main visual design principles we're going to lock in on, right? The first is font. Font is really important because if you think about it, almost all of the information you consume isn't visual. It is through text, right? And we're really lucky because some designer before us spent all the time meticulously crafting these fonts, right? Every small curvature and vector matters when you're creating fonts because even the slightest change is going to create a font with a different personality and character, and it's going to affect the legibility and what sizes it can be read at. It is a very particular science, and other people who are very nice have done it all for us. What we need to do is make sure that we are selecting the right fonts because by now there's a whole bunch of them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that best. So we're going to look at some examples. Here's one called Editorial New Ultralight. I've used this a whole bunch, and I use it because it looks pretty refined. It looks very modern. It's kind of playing with the dimensions of a font, right? You can see it's a little more stretched out, and it has nice serifs, right? You have sans serif and serif fonts. Serif fonts are when there's like little tiny appendages on the ends of them. There's also a few other types of fonts like Egyptian and such, but all you need to know is serif and sans serif. So this is a distinctive font. It's interesting. It's compelling. It makes you think. It's not great small, right? Like I'm struggling to read the little text here. So some fonts are really great as display fonts, which means that they're primarily used really large as headers. Other fonts are very good as like text fonts, which means that they could be read as text. Several font sets like Applezone, which is called San Francisco, has display fonts, and then they also have text fonts, and they look almost the same. But when you shrink it down, you really start to notice those differences because everything gets a lot more compressed. So let's look at some other fonts. Here's one called Aclonica. Instantly, it's a lot blockier. It doesn't look nearly as refined. It's kind of interesting. I'm getting some sort of like fantasy element to it, but kind of like shitty fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons sort of stuff. I'm not really loving it, especially shrunk down. It doesn't really fit with this cool like gradient texture in the same way that the last font did. And these are all sort of opinions that even if you don't share, you should still be sharing in this thought process, really deliberating why you do or don't like a font. Because at the end of the day, if you're just kind of picking them nilly-willy and you're not thinking about that, unfortunately, your audience, the person you're selling to, will be either consciously or subconsciously. Because this sets a very particular tone, and you need to be keying in on what that tone is, right? You don't have to figure out exactly why you don't like it. You don't have to fully analyze each font. And I'll give you an example of that right now. So here's something called Inter. Inter is sort of like the go-to font for Figma designers because it is the fonts that was made in-house at Figma. Personally, I think it is really boring, right? It's not polarizing. It gets the job done. It's sort of like a new age Arial. But people like it because it's very inoffensive. It's a very consistent and dependable font. But here's one that is so very similar, right? But it still has a different vibe. Get ready for this. Don't blink. Do you see a difference? It's very faint, right? And you might not even be able to immediately pick up on what the difference is, but I'm hoping that you feel the difference. Now we can talk about what causes that, right? For one, the lines are a bit more faint. The O is more geometric. There's a bit more space for each of the letters to breathe. They have more of a presence. But overall, in my opinion, there is also just an element that it is a more distinctive and opinionated font that gives it just a slightly different vibe. Now, it still works when shrunk down really small, in part because of its geometricism. But my point here is that there even the most minute details can really lead to a differing impression. So be wary of that, right? Because not only do you have to pick one font, but you're going to often have to pick multiple, and they all have to like mesh together really well. And you're going to have maybe a serif font header and then a sans serif font text, or vice versa. And you're gonna have to figure out what meshes. And if you think about it too much, you might go crazy because you'll start thinking like, oh, what am I even doing here? Like, what's the point of this? But it's really good to think about and to really be an intentional designer. Visual design principle 2 is hierarchy, right? Hierarchy matters in text, header, subheader, paragraph, etc. But it also matters in the layout overall, right? I'm going to show you a graphic really quickly, and I want you to immediately think and internalize what you see first. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Don't jump start. And go. Right? All of you immediately saw Open Studio first. And if you didn't, you're lying, because Open Studio is in the middle. It is a big and bold and interesting text, and that's what the eye goes to first, right? Then maybe later you see Spark SC, and you see the little ARC logo, and you see that it's hosted by Spark SC in collaboration with the Browser Company of New York. And all that is important information. The designer is putting there to articulate to you, but they want you to see Open Studio first, right? Because that establishes the brand. And, you should be, when you look at designs, you should think, hey, what does the designer want me to think? Because if you can understand other designers' thought processes, you'll definitely improve your own, because then you'll start thinking like a designer and you'll be able to make those decisions that lead to converting clients into sales, et cetera, blah, 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 right? I'm going to give you some other examples. Here's one where there's emphasis on the photo. Now, for me at least, the first time I saw this, my eyes immediately went to the bold text on top, right? It is bold, it is brief and concise. There is a big circle over internship. First thing I went to was the text. Other people might go to the photo, right? I can't even watch movies with captions because I can only look at the text. So your mileage may vary, but the point is, the second thing you're going to see is, that photo. So you want to make sure the photo is dynamic. If you're going to put it in the center and give it that valuable real estate, make sure that it helps you articulate your cause, right? Here's an example that I don't find super engaging, right? Like, I don't know what Pico Grid is. I'm sure they're having a good conversation, but I can't even really see one of them. It doesn't really get it done. Meanwhile, if you went up a little closer to them, showed them like smiling and talking and a really interesting, engaging conversation, and then you put that front and center, that would be useful. So be intentional about like what images you use, right? If you look at McDonald's brand guide, they have like 2 colors, red and yellow, but they spend the rest of the brand guide talking about their photos, talking about the images they use. They have an entire thing that's called archery, right? Like the McDonald's logo, the 1, 2. They have so much literature on just how to use that arch in a proper way to help convey their brand image without being too overbearing. Like, that's very important to them. So photos matter. Photos integrate into your brand. They help you convey your mission. So don't just like pick some random thing in your photo roll. Really think, hey, what is this image doing? Is it doing something important? And if not, don't put it in the middle. Don't really include it in your image at all, or your design. You know what I mean? There's emphasis on text, right? Reddit resume workshop. Your eyes probably went first to the Reddit logo because it is big and bold and very colorful. And now you think, oh, Reddit? Immediately see resume workshop, right? It's a very simple offering. The most important element is probably that someone from Reddit is at the event. That is the appeal there. That is why it is good to market that. Probably some sort of Reddit recruitment event. If I'm being honest, I think it would have been important to include some supplementary information, really confirming that, just because it doesn't precisely say that. But the most important thing is that it did succeed in that initial hook, which is like, hey, something to do with Reddit, right? That's the hook. That's engaging. You want to make sure that your marketing always has a hook, because if people are not like driving at 70 miles an hour, looking at your billboard and not on the road, like if they're not doing that, if they're being safe drivers, like you failed. You have not marketed your product. So shame on you. Like you need a hook. You need to be eye-catching. Here's an example of type treatment, right? It's a bit more fun, it's a bit more custom, it's a bit more interesting. You look at it a bit longer. In the short term, though, it is less legible. So you're not going to want to write like an entire paragraph with this, because the reader's going to get exhausted. But it is good for like a nice header to like, get you into it, immersed, to articulate what tone, what vibe you're trying to give off, right? I look at this and I think like, wow, whoever is setting up this event is so cool with this like interesting graffiti font. When in reality, they're probably just some nerd designers. So marketing can be deceiving, but that's sort of the point. That's why it's so exciting. That's why you all do what you do. Anywho, those are some examples. And then the last design principle is color, right? What emotions do you want to communicate? Because color is imbued with emotion, right? We have millennia of culture that take these simple colors and they just subject them to the most deepest, perhaps darkest feelings, right? Like, if you look into a dark blue, you see like the deep sea, and you look into a nice quaint green color, you think about nature, you feel in touch, you want to roll around in the grass. Like, these are colors that truly do resonate with us on a deep level. So make sure that you're using them properly in your design. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit discordant. It's going to fail in its purpose. So I'm going to show you some examples where the only thing that is different is the colors. So these were put together by my good friend Jade. So first, this is a bit bolder, right? You have blue, a deep blue on a white background. So the reason that that's bold is because there is a very high level of contrast, right? It makes it look very sharp. When someone has like deep blue eyes, it's very like stunning just because of that major contrast. Like it's eye-catching, truly. So same with this and the I like turtles graphic. This is a bit warmer. There's a lower contrast between the background and the foreground, which means that it's not as harsh on the eyes. It's perhaps a little less distinctive, but then also the colors themselves are very warm, right? Yellow is like a sunset or a sunrise, and brown is warm soil or something. Or this looks like a giraffe. That's where my mind went first. I saw this and I thought giraffe. So if you like giraffes, very warm. If you are scared of giraffes, very cold, right? Cold, color theory is really truly based on the most intrinsic elements of our inner selves. Anywho, this is a bit more techie, right? You've got this darker, almost black background with green text. This is pretty popular in Web3 because they want to articulate being very technical. And I think that this is getting a little antiquated, right? This is an anachronism. Like, we don't actually usually use computers with green text anymore. And I think that goes back to color being a cultural thing, right? Cultures change, and so does the color theory around it. And you want to be really mindful of that, right? Maybe it doesn't matter for you in this situation, but if you are designing something and you're designing it for a past generation, like that might not resonate with Gen Z, or vice versa. If you create something for Gen Z that's like very, popping and 3D, like that might not necessarily resonate with older generations. So you have to do your research on who you are appealing to, what they grew up with, what they were immersed in, what formed their experiences. And that's going to lend insight on what colors to use, what fonts to use, what impression to put across to best convert. This is a bit more youthful. Softer colors, less contrast. It's very innocent, playful, etc. More adjectives. But the point is that color does play a big role in you articulating your vision. So yeah, design is a heck of a lot of fun. It's kind of difficult at times and it takes time to refine your eyes, but the more intentional you are about it, the faster you can iterate, the faster you can learn what good design is. But now I'm going to do what I probably should have been doing this whole time, which is teach you a little bit about Figma. So let's go to this Figma file, right? And it is not March 18th. That is okay. We're going to create a frame. This little octothorpe, you're going to press it, and then you're going to press the 15 Pro. It's usually good to use like the newest, latest devices, just because that's the current meta. So we're going to make a simple iPhone app mockup. It's going to look terrible, but that's okay. So let's say we want to make a simple social media app. Well, what are on, what's on a social media app? Images, right? So we're going to draw a frame, and you might be wondering, oh, why don't we use like a rectangle? Well, you almost always want to use frames because frames are able to embed other, texts and images and layout. It really automate the layout process. Rectangles cannot do any of that, right? They can just make squares. So much more limiting. You always want to use frames because you can always just fill in a frame and just pretend it was a rectangle. Anywho, so I'm going to create a simple square by shifting and then moving the frame to expand it. Then I'm going to go into the design tab and let's see. So you're going to press fill and then you're going to press this, right? Now you're able to change the color of this frame, which is really fun and really useful. But for now, we don't want this to be a color. We want it to be an image. So instead, we're going to press this little picture button. And you know what? I'm just going to go to my photos. Oh, that's me. Perfect. Okay, we're going to use that. So you're just going to drag it in and bam, there's our first photo. But if we're making Instagram, this is not Instagram. What does Instagram need? Well, one, you have to have like a user posting this. So let's do that. Now let's press on this big T for typography. And let's say, I got some OG username. And of course that's a bit big. So you're going to scale it down. You're going to go right over here. And, you are going to be using these sidebars a lot. So let's scale this down. Let's bring it to 20. Sure. Now, I love this font. It's just not great for social media, right? It's not very legible at a small size. And it looks really good when it's really big and there's nothing else on the screen. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of stuff on the screen. So we're going to change this to, let's say, Poppins. Poppins is cool. It's very geometric, which makes it more legible at a small size. We're not going to use thin. Let's use regular, right? Usually you can rely on regular. Now, I'm also going to have probably a profile picture, right? So this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting. So let's go back to our frame. And now let's make a little tiny frame. And we're going to fill that in with another image, right? For now, I'm literally just going to make my profile picture like this, right? Drag this in. Now we have a square, but profile pictures aren't square, they're circular. So either I could have actually used the ellipse tool, or I can be a little cheater. And I highly recommend cheating because, like I said, if you can use a frame, you should always use the frame. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go into this little sideways L, right? That is a corner radius, and that's super important in development and design alike. So we're going to just put this at 100, right? If we put it at 1, there's like very slight curvature, but we want a circle, right? So we want a lot of curvature. Change that to 100. Here's where it gets cool. And here's where you really should listen if you want to either pass this off to a developer or develop it yourself. So I'm going to show you how auto layout works, right? This is a bit more technical, but it's super important if you want to get the most out of Figma. Essentially, if I want to organize all of this, I could do it by hand, right? It's not too hard. I can be like, yeah, I like this here. And then I like that about there. I see the red line, that looks good. And then, this maybe like right here. And then let's just copy all of this with like Option holding down and then dragging. I like this. You could design like that, and a lot of people do. But if you want to be able to develop it easier afterwards, you want to use auto layouts. How you're going to do that is you're going to select two objects. So you're going to press one, and then you're going to hold down Shift and press another. So now you're selecting both. This is where it gets exciting. Either you can press this little auto layout button, or you can use a hotkey. So I'm going to do Shift A, right? Holding them both down at the same time. It's going to auto layout. Now you're able to mess around with these two items as one. So let's say I want to align it to the right instead of the left. So I can just press this, right? And that doesn't really do anything unless now you're making that frame larger, right? And now you can go like back and forth. You can maybe center it in the middle. Maybe we make it like this, right? You can really play around with this with auto layout, and it gets everything mathematically precise, which is very important when you're trying to make sure that everything is in sync. So another cool thing you can do, right, is like, let's say you want the profile picture on one side, the text on the other. So instead of, changing this gap in the middle, you can instead just press this little button and change it to auto. And that is going to just put one at one side of the layout and one at the other. Then when you change it, right, it adapts accordingly. So that's really exciting. It's also completely useless to our purposes. So instead, we are going to go back to 10. We are going to bring this, like down here. And then this frame's a little big. What we can actually do is we can hug the contents, which means that it's going to shrink down to only cover the two items in the auto layout. So let's do that. Let's hug contents along both axes. And now we're back to square one. So we're gonna center both of these, looking good. And now let's use auto layout again. So now we have this frame and this frame. We're gonna Shift A, and now, maybe we'll reduce the gap here. And look at that, we did it again. It looks a little wacky though, so you're gonna wanna mess around with this, right? Maybe add some padding. These are all terms that are going to reemerge when you're actually developing the app. So none of this is wasted time, right? Even though it kind of seems pointless, like, oh, I can just drag stuff around. When you're actually developing it, you can't drag stuff around. You have to use these sorts of numbers. So you might as well get a head start when you have the visual interface to use. Anyway, we made this little social media. Now let's option and then drag, right? Now we have a second post, right? I'm just spamming my Instagram with the same picture over and over again. We're gonna select both of them, Shift A, made another auto layout, play around with this, and like, bam, now we have like a sort of very simple feed going. Is it ugly? Sure, but it is precise and it is all laid out. And if I wanted to code this, it would take me like 30 seconds because I know exactly what values to use. I know I can rest assured that these are precisely equivalent. Everything's the same, everything's in sync. That's really useful. Now let's play around with a few other elements of Figma before ending this very long tutorial session. So for one, let's say we want to change the background color. Well, you go into Fill, you can play around with this. Wow, super cool. Let's say you want to use a gradient. Now, this you want to use very sparingly because a harsh gradient is just not very appealing on the eyes. But if you find like some way to really make it sync with the colors at play, keep it really fresh, very subtle, you can try to get something working. Now this is going to depend on the context. For instance, if you're working on an app where primarily you're supposed to be focused on photos, you probably want barely any color, right? Because that detracts from the photos, which is what's important, right? And now we're going back to talking about design theory again, which is why I wanted to start with the design theory before we got into Figma. Because a lot of these are recurring mistakes that early designers make, and then they spend a bunch of time getting it all put together, and they're like, why does this kind of feel off? It's because you didn't consider the fundamentals first. Let's add border radiuses, border radii. I don't know. But we're gonna add them. Now we have a sort of fun vibe going on. And now I think last and also least, I'm going to show you how to just like mock this up. So it's finished. Actually, no, let's add an icon. So go to something like hero icons. Let's add the little dots, right? That open up settings. I'm gonna put this right here. Well, that's not where that's supposed to go, right? And when everything gets auto laid out, it gets a little more finicky at first, but believe me, it is worth it. So let's try to like put that right there. Perfect. And now, if I stretch this all out, it's not gonna follow, but let's quickly put these in a frame, then make this auto layout, and then add a 20 pixel padding on that side. And like, bam, now we're cooking, right? So, over time it gets easier, it gets more intuitive. This isn't a great example in that this is incredibly ugly, but finally you can put it all together. You can go find a mock-up plugin. Get your 14 Pro. They like to hide these. Find a free one. Drag your little design in. Sure, I guess. And then last and least, you're gonna render the selected frame. And wow. See, I wouldn't use this app. This looks really bad. But now you have the skills to make one that looks so much better, perhaps out of spite. Like perhaps like, oh, I just listened to this really long tutorial and this is all he made. Now I'm going to go and make a better social media app or something. So yeah, it's really that simple. It takes just a lot of practice, a lot of repetitions to get it all feeling super natural. But it's very doable. It's really all about the amount of iterations you get in, right? The first time you go around, you're probably going to have something that looks like this, and you're not going to be happy with it. But if you really think, hey, why am I not happy about it? For instance, this gradient is weird, and there's not enough visual information on the page, and there's no intuitive user experience, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe figure out specifically why you don't like a design. Your next design is not going to have those problems. It's going to be better. It's going to have new problems, but then you're going to patch those too. And you're going to keep on patching patching these holes in this sinking ship until the ship doesn't sink. And then you have a good design. So I hope this was at least a little insightful. And yeah, go Brian. Bye.